Good afternoon, everybody. It's Malik, and I'll take a quick little break here from the challenges here. I'm doing a set of videos on codes and ciphers. Because if you've been running, hack these site challenges, or challenges in general, or you're preparing to take something like a CEH test, or a CASP test, or a network defender test, or a first responder test, or whatever, anything in security, you really need to understand codes and ciphers. So I'm going to break these things down in a couple of different videos. This one's not going to take very long because these are going to be your older ones and your more simplistic ones, but they're really good to understand, because if you understand these, it makes understanding the newer ones a whole lot easier, because the newer ones are just different strains of the ones that we used 100 BC. So we're just going to run through some substitution ciphers, and there's going to be a couple of videos on substitution ciphers because there's a ton of them. But overall, what is a substitution cipher? It does absolutely nothing but takes your plain text and substitutes it with something else in the place of your plain text. So instead of a letter that is your part of your message, it's going to replace it with a different letter, depending on the rules of the cipher. It could replace it with a number, it could replace it with a symbol. There's multiple ways to do it. These things can be very simple up to extremely complex. Excuse me. There's three main types: monoalphabetic, polyalphabetic, and polygraphic. Now we're just going to deal with the monoalphabetics in here. Some of your more simple ones. Okay, well, the first one that we're going to talk about, not the first one that was ever done, but the first one we're going to talk about is the Caesar cipher. Very simplistic, also known as a rot 3, a rotation 3. It just replaces a letter of your secret message with another letter of the alphabet that's in a fixed position. Okay, that's the big part. It's in a fixed position. So if we have our alphabet A through Z, you just rewrite the alphabet underneath of the original alphabet, but you slide it. If you slide it 3 places, it's known as a rot 3. You slide it 5 places, it's known as a rot 5. 13 places is known as a rot 13, which is actually still used because there's some extra things we do to rot 13s. This one I slid it over to F. So now A's are now F's, B's are now G's, C's are now H's. So I slid the entire alphabet over by 6. So B, C, D, E, F. Or really I slid the whole thing by 5. So it's known as a rot 5. So if we have the secret message, or if our secret message is "this is a secret message," well, that's the first line. Now we take a look at the first line and we find the T, and we look at the second line, and for every T we substitute it with a Y. For the H we substitute it with an M, and we end up with something like that. Okay, at first glance they have no idea what's going on, but these are very easy to brute force. There's orders of the alphabet, letters that we use all the time, letters that we use very rarely. E's, A's, I's, S's, T's, we use those all the time. We don't use Z's and Q's that much. So you kind of look through this thing, and the kind of giveaway here is whenever, like these X's, wherever there's one X, well, X is always going to be S's. So if you can figure out one word, like if we could figure out that word, well, it's a one-letter word, so it's got to be A or I. Okay, so we start with an A, which is going to replace any F's in the message with an A, and then we see if we can still build words out of it. So it's a pretty simple thing to brute force, But again, this thing was 50 BC. Now, let's jump even earlier than that. It's called the Abash cipher, 500 to 600 BC. Now, this is a very specific cipher. Breaking it is very simple. All they do is they reverse the alphabet. So we have our typical alphabet from A to Z. We just flip the alphabet from Z to A. So all A's are now Z's. All Z's are now A's. So again, if that's our secret message, that is our cipher. Again, we still have the same issue, which every letter, every time an H appears, if we can connect that to an S, every H is going to be an S. So it's no more difficult to break than the Caesar cipher. In fact, it's a little bit easier to break than the Caesar cipher because all Abash ciphers are nothing but a flip. At least in the Caesar cipher, we've got 25 different possible combinations of where those letters can slide. A keyword cipher. Well, generally was built from the Caesar cipher, but it makes it a little bit more difficult because we add a keyword to it. Now, there are some rules to this keyword. You cannot duplicate letters. So whatever your keyword is, it can have duplicate letters in it. So I can't use a thing like password because, well, it's got 2 S's. So that doesn't work. You still write out your alphabet, but for your cipher, you start with your keyword. And that can take up as many spaces as you want. And then you write out the rest of the alphabet, not using any letter that you use for your keyword. So of course mine's going to go A, B, C, but there's not going to be a D in it because there's a D in keyword. This makes it a little bit more complex than the Caesar cipher because there is seemingly no connection between the A and the K and the B and the E and the C and the Y. Because if you first say start looking at an A and a K, you may think of just a simple Caesar. So you may count the differences between A and K. So you go, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. So that's 10. So you'll look at B and go, well, if A equals K, then B must equal L. Well, no, here it doesn't. So it does add a little bit of strength to what started off as the Caesar cipher. And the longer the keyword, the more strength you have. Okay, this is starting to lead into where our cipher does not have the alphabet in any particular order. It's completely scrambled, so there is no connection between A in the cipher code and B in the cipher code because it's random. Okay, so again, to break this, that's our secret message. That's going to be our return. Now, of course, from after our keyword on, and even where our keyword is at, we still have the issues with all P's are going to be S's. And even here, all A's are always going to be K. It doesn't matter because this thing never rotates. Alright. A pig pen or a Masonic cipher. Now this is from the 1700s, done by Freemasons. Again, it's just a substitution cipher, but they don't use letters. They actually use symbols. So they make a grid, and I just took a snapshot of one that was online. They make a grid very similar to this. It can be any graphic at all. And when they need that letter, they just use the graphic in place of the letter. So like the snapshot I took here, where their plain text is X marks the spot. When they get to the letter X, where they just come over here and they find what is the symbol that X uses. Well, it's this with the dot in it. So there we go. There's our symbol. Same with the T. What about the T? Well, it's the same thing, but it doesn't have the dot. The H it's these 3 walls. The E is all 4 walls. So they just substitute it with symbols. Again, the symbols don't change. So if you can figure out what E's are, if you can figure out the word the, well, then you've nailed every T in their plain text, every H in their plain text, and every E in their plain text, and you can kind of work off to figure out what other ones are. Okay. And one more. All right, this one started out fairly simplistic, but started getting really difficult. The Polytheists Square. And actually, this was even before the Caesar cipher. This is 200 to 100 BC. We're substituting letters and numbers. Okay, but we have to build a grid, a 5 by 5 grid. Well, a 5 by 5 grid only leaves us 25 spaces. We need 26 for our letters, so we typically combine I and J. Now, I have seen some where they just drop off the Z if they don't need it, but I and J are typically combined. So you build something like this. Okay? And now, of course, you write your secret message. But now, you take your letter, the first letter is a T, so here's your T. You find the row that it comes from, and then the column that it comes from. So now the T becomes 44. The H becomes 23. The I becomes 24. The S becomes 43. And you end up with that. Now, this is one of the first where the output is larger than the input. Because for every one letter, you're going to have 2 characters. Now again, we can greatly increase the strength of this thing by not putting the alphabet in alphabetical order, but writing it some other way. But here, dealing with the initial Polytheists Square, it's in alphabetical order. So they're the monoalphabetics. So you're kind of looking at them going, all right, well, they're all pretty straightforward. Nothing complex about them at all. And you're right. But I said earlier that they could be complex. Well, we still have 2 more types of substitution ciphers to look at. The polyalphabetics, which get far more complex, and the polygraphics. But let me show you a substitution cipher that I know you've heard of, but they take this thing to a whole new level. It is the Enigma. You may have heard of the Enigma. Built in 1918, not cracked into the late 30s. And of course is what Germany used to send encoded messages. Alright, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because, I mean, there are books written on this thing. If you want to learn like how Enigma was broken, you can watch the movie The Imitation Game. I would suggest you read the book. The Imitation Game is much more true to life than the movie is. The movie took a whole lot of artistic license to change things around. But the book or the movie both will give you a really good idea of how complex this thing was. So there's a couple of things to understand about Enigma. It looked like a typewriter, but inside of it there were 3 rotors. Now, each rotor could turn, and on these rotors were the alphabet, so A through Z, but they weren't in alphabetical order. Every key press would cause rotor number 1 to turn. When rotor number 1 finished a full revolution, it caused rotor number 2 to turn. When that completed a full revolution, it would cause rotor number 3 to turn. It also had 26 holes in the front and 13 cables. The cables were used for linking a letter to a letter. So they would, in my case, I wrote, so P would be mapped to O. They hooked the cable up to the the hole for the letter P and the hole for the letter O. So really what that did inside the Enigma box was it would map the letter P with O, and it would map the letter O back to P. Okay. Added a level of complexity to it. So this is what it looked like. Now, up here at the top, when the user hit the letter R on their keyboard, because this was, whatever their regular message was started with an R, they hit the letter R. The first thing it did, it looked at the plug board, and it sees that, ooh, they have a plug that connects R to Y. Substitution number 1. Now R equals Y. Now it goes to rotor number 1. Now again, remember, there's a set of letters inside of here and the inputs. So when it gets to rotor number 1, it sees, oh, well, we mapped Y to O. So now Y turns to O. And this rotates. So next time Y will not equal O. Now it goes to rotor number 2. And it goes, oh, wait a minute, O? Oh no, we mapped O to B. So now it turns to B. Now it goes to rotor number 3. And it goes, B? No, oh no, B equals N. So it changed it to the letter N. Then it goes to the reflector. The reflector is hard-coded. A letter is always matched to a different letter. So let's say, okay, now we map B to A. And then we shoot them back through the rotors again. But the rotors are now in inverse mode. So none of the letters are the same anymore. They're shooting off a different side. Completely different set of letters. So now A is mapped to M. So now it's M. Then it goes up here. And it goes, wait a minute, M? No, M is V. Then it goes here. And it goes, V? No, V is J. Or let's say V is Z. Then we take it all the way down to our plug board again, and it goes Z. Oh no, we map Z to V. In which case it will light up on the top of the box the letter V. So they type in an R and it pops out a V. If they typed in an R again, chances of it being a V is next to impossible. So this thing truly runs through 9 different substitutions. Okay? 3 of them random on every key press, which is why it took 20 some years to break. And it was only broken by another machine. There were too many variables in it for a human to break it. They had to build a machine to do it. So yes, the substitution ciphers we saw earlier were simplistic, but this is what you can do when you take substitutions to a whole nother level. So definitely look up Enigma and study those. It's incredibly complex. It's actually even way more complex than this, but you get the gist of how it works. Alright, so on the next video we're going to take a look at polyalphabetics, where we're going to get much harder ciphers with Vigenère and Beaufort auto keys and running keys. They're a whole lot harder to decrypt without having the key or either something to push you in the right direction. These other ones we can brute force. This one, it's going to be very, very difficult to brute force them without knowing how they built them. Alright, so until next time, my friends, if you like the videos, give it a big old like down at the bottom. If you want to subscribe to the channel, do that. I do have my Twitter account on there if you want to join me on Twitter, because I'm going to start doing some live feeds to where we can get together and I'll talk about this stuff, and who knows, maybe even start running some challenges together. So until next time, this is Malik and I'm out.